Okay, today's stuff we're going to learn is Ketubot daf samach aleph. I will preface this by saying it's a bit of an both interesting daf, strange daf. A lot of the things we're dealing with are not what I would call halachic issues. We will learn a bunch of interesting things about their society. Anyway, with that introduction, a little hard to describe in advance what we're going to see, but take a deep breath. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Lisa Malik and Adi Weiner in honor of Sari and Mark Winnick's anniversary. We feel blessed to have met you during our sabbaticals in Israel and are thrilled that you came to Jerusalem for Rivka and Charlie's wedding this summer. Okay, we're going to get started with from the bottom of Samach Amud Bet. The Meshamsha Be'rechaya Havule B'nei Nichbe. The Meshamsha Al-Ara Havule B'nei Shamute. These are lines that are going to be difficult to translate and difficult to swallow. But again, we've seen things like this before, and I'll describe them the way I understand them in the way that we always understand statements like this, which is they're not meant to say if your child has a particular issue, right? So here they're going to say, right? I don't even want to translate it in this way because I don't believe that that's what it's saying, but let's just read it and then I'll explain. If you have relations with your husband by the millstone, okay, which is a public place, not exactly the most appropriate place to do that. You're going to have children with epilepsy, okay, or possibly that's the way to translate it. What they're saying is not that if you have an epileptic child, it must be because you did that, right? That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is, we don't want you doing this type of thing. So we're going to tell you, right, this, as we call it, the fear tactics. We're going to tell you that this is what's going to happen to you, right? The classic one, the one you are probably the most familiar with, are ashalosh averot nashim metot b'shat leidatan. There are three things that cause women to die in childbirth, right? And then, right, if totally blanking, right? The candlelighting, nidda, and chala. Okay, so that's not. It doesn't mean if you don't do those things, you're going to die in childbirth. What they're trying to say is we take this very seriously, and if we're going to take it very seriously, then we're going to scare you into saying this is how you should do it. Now, we cringe when we hear something like this, but again, we're not living in their times and we don't understand the style of speaking. Style of speaking changes over time, right? Things that now people get offended by that you say nobody got offended by them 50 years ago, right? That it's all a matter of speech, and speech is all what do you say, is a product of the society. So this is the language in which they spoke. People understood it like that. They didn't think, oh, you're going to die in childbirth because you didn't do that. They just understood that that's what the rabbis meant. Take this very seriously. So let's move on. The second one, if you're mashamish al-ara, if you have relations with your husband on the ground, then what's going to happen to you? You're going to have children with long necks. Okay, again, they're trying to scare people into not doing this. Now we're going to move from, right now the first one is very clear, I think, that they didn't want people doing this in public. Although you could explain it in a different way, which is maybe there was a superstition about being near a millstone. And maybe doing it on the ground is also a superstition. The next one's for sure superstitions. If when you're pregnant, you step on donkey dung, you're going to have children who are whose hair falls out. Okay, they're going to have issues with their hair. If you eat mustard, you'll have children who are gluttonous. Okay, this is by the way, probably why it's connected, because they're talking about foods that are good to eat when you're pregnant or when you're nursing, right? We ended yesterday with all the foods that are bad for nursing. Now we're going to get into all sorts of things you should avoid when you're pregnant, or maybe you should actually eat when you're pregnant. If you eat cress, you'll end up with kids whose eyes tear all the time. If you eat these types of fish, these little fish, okay, this seems to be clear, like beady-eyed fish, you're going to end up with some sort of issue with your eyes. Some people say the eyes come out of your head. Some people say, right, that they bulge out. Some people say they're little beady eyes. Difference of opinion about what exactly this means. If you eat, this we saw yesterday, if you eat soil, you'll have ugly children. If you drink beer, you'll have darker skinned children. So I'm going to stop here for 1 minute. This is, by the way, we also speak in this language, different language, but right, when we're pregnant, or we know people are pregnant, right? There's these lists of all sorts of foods to avoid, foods that are good to eat, right? How much do we read up, forget about being pregnant, right? All the time, people are, what's good, what will cause health, good health benefits, poor health benefits. And notice I'm sure if you read any of these things, you'll notice that every 10 years it changes, every 5 years, every 30 years, right? There's so many things that people thought were really good for them, and then they realized were terrible for them, and vice versa. So it makes sense that the things that they're saying, right, might hold true today, might not hold true today, right? We say don't drink when you're pregnant nowadays, right? So they talk about how it's bad to drink beer when you're pregnant. Who knows, right? But this is not meant to be understood as a halachic thing. This was the rabbis giving good advice, just nutritional advice, or other things, or again, superstitions. People also today believe in all sorts of superstitions. Now we get to the part of the list, which is things you should do when you're pregnant. If you eat meat and drink wine, specifically they think wine is good, you'll have healthy children. If you eat eggs, you'll have children with eyes that are large eyes. This seems to be a contrast to eating fish. If you eat this type of fish, it's not the same kind of fish as the little fish we were talking about before. You'll have graceful children. This we know from Pesach, karpas, some sort of probably green leafy thing. You'll have children who are glowing, who have a beautiful face. If you eat coriander, you'll have full, healthy children, which means, right, corpulent is maybe a good word for it. If you eat etrogim, there is actually a custom for women to eat etrogim when they're pregnant. You'll have children who smell beautiful. Right, they don't actually eat etrogim, they eat etrog jam. Barte de Shavar Malka, we're now going to have a story about this. The daughter of Shavar Malka was a Persian king. We're going to have 2 Persian kings in today's daf. The daughter of Shavar Malka, Achla Ba'ime Etroga, her mother ate etrogim when she was pregnant with her. Okay, this is a bit extreme story. Right, when they would bring all the spices out to the king, they would bring the daughter in front of them all because she had such a beautiful smell to her. Okay, so that's our little section about good advice, right? Which again, not really a halachic sugya. Most of what we're going to see today, I mean, some things are halachic, but a bunch of things are really not exactly halachic. Amar Rav Huna, which actually makes sense because we're in the middle of a mishnah that's not super halachic, right? We're in this mishnah about the melachot that the woman has to do for her husband. And as she brings in another maidservant, she could drop a few things off the list. Right? I don't see any rabbi making sure that all of us are doing all of our duties that we're supposed to and doing, I don't think that was meant to be either a halachic issue. We'll get back to that about what it was meant to be. Anyway, we'll talk about it soon. We're now dealing still with the nursing. We got a little bit off track because we were talking about foods that are good for nursing mothers, and then we got to foods that are good for pregnant mothers, and with that also where you should or should not have relations. Now, Amar Rav Huna. Badik lan Rav Huna bar Chinna, and I asked the question. What if she wants to nurse, but the husband doesn't want her to nurse? Presumably he thinks it's not good for her. She won't look good. I don't know. He has some issue with it. Shom in la. Okay, maybe he wants her not to be so time-consumingly, with the child all the time. Maybe he wants attention for himself. Well, we listen to her. Why do we listen to her? Very interestingly, the Gemara here writes, sometimes you feel like they understand women, and sometimes you feel like they don't really understand women. This one they clearly do. Tsara didahu. It's her pain, right? If she doesn't nurse, we can understand this in all sorts of ways. Number one, she's engorged, right? It's very unpleasant for her. And if, he says stop nursing, it's going to be very uncomfortable for her. Obviously, it's a temporary discomfort, but still, it's her discomfort. So she gets to choose how to relate to things that are on her body, right? The other thing is she could really want a nurse, right? She wants that connection to the child. And if he doesn't want her to have that, right? That's her internal pain. She gets to decide that she wants it. But what about who Omer, in other words, that he understood. But here comes his question. Who Omer lahanik, v'hi omeret shelo lahanik. She doesn't want a nurse. She wants to get a nursemaid, right? In those days, there was no formula. She wants a nursemaid, a wet nurse. Sorry, not a nursemaid, a wet nurse. She wants a wet nurse. Now, he doesn't want to pay for it, right? He wants her to nurse. So what's the story? Mahu. Do we say? Kol echad delav orcha. Okay, so first of all, if it's not their way to nurse, meaning they both come from, now here we're getting to socioeconomic status. Nowadays, it's a big thing. Many people want a nurse, right? Because it's good to nurse. It's healthy for the baby. Now think about a wet nurse, right? So first of all, there's two things, right? It's good for the mother. The mother likes the connection. But also, most people talk about the health value for the child. So in this case, you have a wet nurse, so you're still getting the health issue because the baby's nursing. It's not like you're giving them formula. And she doesn't want to be involved in it. She's not interested in that part of the connection of the mother. So the question is, can we listen to her? So it depends. Depends on what? Well, it's a financial issue. Can she insist that he pay the money for it, right? Does she have the rights to do that? Remember, she doesn't really have her own money because her possessions are really in his, they're under his authority. We're going to get to all that soon. Oh, he has rights to all her, right? The nechse malog, the nechse tzon barzel. He uses them during the marriage. She only gets them after the marriage. So the question is, who do we listen to? So it depends on the situation. If it's lav orcha, shomin la. If neither of them and their families, they both come from a socioeconomic status where they all have wet nurses, then obviously he has to pay for it. But the question is, he orcha, v'hu lav orcha mai. What if she comes from a family that did nurse their children, but he is in a higher socioeconomic status, and his family never had, the mothers all hired wet nurses. My. Batar didazlina or batar didazlina. Now you might remember, we discussed this already in a different context. So do we follow her? Do we follow his custom? Upashin lemeha. They answered him from here. Ola imo ve'ena yoredet imo. Remember, she goes up in status to his status, but she doesn't go down with him. So if he comes from a lower socioeconomic status, he has to keep things at her status. His responsibilities are wherever she is. But if she's from a lower socioeconomic status, he's from a higher, he also has to give her whatever he had, whatever his family has. So therefore, basically, he's going to have to pay for the wet nurse for her. Amar Rav Huna Maikra. Where do we get this concept from? That she goes up to him and he doesn't go down to her. V'hi be'ulat ba'al, ba'aliyato shel ba'al v'lo b'yiridato shel ba'al. Okay, this is the story with Yitzchak and Rivka, and she ends up with Avimelech, and then God comes to Avimelech in a dream, and he says to him, Hincha meit, you're going to die now, Alisha shelakachta, because you took this woman who was married, right? How does he say married? He be'ulat ba'al. Now, it could have said, right, she has a husband. Why do you have to say be'ulat ba'al, double language, which means she has had relations with her husband? It's a weird language there. So what do we learn from there? Be'ulat ba'al, instead of be'ula being she, from the word be'ilah, that he had relations with her, they darshan it ba'aliyato shel ba'al. From aliyah, she goes up to her husband's status, below b'yiridato shel ba'al, and she doesn't go down. Right? That means also she won't go down if he's in a lower status than she is. Rabbi Elazar brings a different proof, Amar Mehacha, also from Sefer Bereshit, but from much earlier on. This is an interesting line. Ki hi hayta em kol chai. Talks about Chava. Why was she called Chava? Because she was the mother of all living things. Now, why? How do they understand Chai? First of all, she wasn't the mother of all living things, right? Many were created before her. So what could that mean? Well, l'chayim nitna v'lo litza'ar nitna. Marriage was given to bring life and not to bring pain, right? People who are in difficult marriages understand this very well, right? That's not the purpose of marriage. And therefore, it has to bring her life, good things, and not to be bringing her any pain or any sort of discomfort, which here it's going to be if she has to go lower, right? That's going to be unpleasant for her. By the way, in both directions, if she's from a higher socioeconomic status, it's going to be difficult for her to go down. So for that, she didn't have marriage. Think about the other. If she's married into a family with high socioeconomic status and she doesn't, and her husband doesn't give her all those things, right? Every time she's with his family, she's going to feel on the outs, right? It's going to create a difficult situation for her. So, okay, next. Now we're going back to this Mishnah. So the Mishnah had delineated a very interesting Mishnah. Every servant she brings in, every maidservant, removes some of, there were 7 melachot listed. There happened to be more, but our Mishnah lists 7 of them. There's 7 jobs she's supposed to do. At every stage, we basically reduce some of the jobs she has to do. Now, all you women out there are thinking, what? Okay, the woman, right, let's think about it like this. The woman does all 7 jobs herself if she has no maidservants. As soon as she brings in one maidservant, what happens? You would think, what? The maidservant takes her job and she doesn't have to do anything, right? Wouldn't you think that? That's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that she has to do all of the jobs, right, herself. But if she brings in a maidservant, the maidservant does the first three. If she brings in another one, she does the next two. If she brings in another one, she does the next two. But the maidservant's not as capable as the woman, right? First of all, that often happens, right? You can do a lot in your house, but you bring someone in, right? They do their job a little sluggishly. They don't exactly do it the way you do it. We're all very familiar, I assume, with this kind of thing. So exactly as you're saying, right? This is classic, right? Or you see this at work. You're in a job, you leave the job and they bring like 2 or 3 people to replace you because you were doing so many things that, they can't find someone who can do all those things. So that's not exactly the answer of the Gemara. It is kind of the answer of the Gemara. The Gemara gives a bit of a different answer, but the question is that's exactly what the Gemara is asking, which is a great question. So if she brings in one, then she doesn't have to do the first 3. Remember, she doesn't have to grind, bake, and which is also cook, and do the laundry. So, right, which are the harder, more labor-intensive jobs. So she gets those off her plate. But it seems clear from the Mishnah that she does have to do all the other jobs. And this is confusing. Why wouldn't she say, why can't she say to him, I brought you another woman in my place. She could replace me entirely. I don't want to do any of the jobs. To which they answer, Mishum da Amarla, because he could say to her, this new maidservant is now, let me just put it simply. We were 2. Now we added a maidservant to the picture. We're 3 people. So the new person can do everything for her and for me. But who's going to do your stuff, right? Who's going to do your laundry? We now have, 50% more laundry. We have 50% more cooking to do. We all know it's not exactly true, but for laundry, by the way, it is because they did all the laundry by hand. It's not like they threw it in a washing machine. So, for cooking, often you cook for 2, you cook for 3. It's not the biggest difference, but yes, it is more work. And basically, having another person just adds more work already, and therefore she can only do some of the jobs. By the way, this also, I want to talk about this because we said it's not really, this Mishnah isn't exactly a halachic Mishnah, okay? There's no one standing there making sure that I'm doing all those 7 jobs in my house and that if I have a housekeeper, right, I don't have to do all of them. And there's no sort of halachic issue here, but what we're talking about here is contractual law. We have this document, right, that states this Ketubot, who's responsible for what, right? And even if it doesn't state it, it's what's behind it about who's responsible for what in the marriage. There's responsibilities. And if he wants to claim you're not doing your responsibilities, he can use this. I mean, it is a little halachic in the sense, what I mean is it's not halachic in the sense that this is a recipe, this is how your marriage should look. And these are the things the woman should do, and these are the things the man should do. It's not exactly like that. It's more, the way I understand it anyway, is it's more, if there's an issue and he claims you're not doing it, she can claim that's not my responsibility because I brought a maidservant. It's her responsibility. And that's why this whole discussion is, this whole question is asked and the answers are what she could make a claim to him and what he could claim back to her. Because the issue is, right, who's responsible for what here? And what legal rights does he have to claim you're not doing what you're supposed to do? And what could she claim? I don't need to do that. This isn't part of the contract, right? I brought you someone to do it. I don't need to do that. So that's why it's in the form of discussion here, because it's in the event. That's why I want to make it very clear. It doesn't mean this is the way it has to be, but in the event that there's a disagreement with them about something, these are the factors that come into consideration. So next, 2, right? If she brings in 2 people, she already doesn't need to cook and she doesn't need to nurse. It does sound like she has to do the rest, right? Which is the spinning of the wool and the setting up of the bed. V'temale, but why didn't she say it? She could say to him, if it's all an issue that we added another person and right, when we added the first, well, it adds more work to the house. So now if you said before one can cover herself and you, then great. I brought in another person. So she can handle me and her. And the first one can handle you and her. And great. Now we're set. We have 4, right? We have 2 people who are in charge of themselves and another person the same way I was in charge of you and me, and I could have done it all myself. These women should be able to cover everything. To which he answers, Mishum da'amala kamei orcheu parche mantarch. But wait, who's going to deal with the guests and the people who come by, the passerbys? Now, why wasn't this an issue before? Well, the more
Right? This might be true, might not be true, but the more people you have working in your house, the more able you are to invite people in, and the more work, right? Everything, it's like, you stop doing one thing, you start doing something else. It's not like you all of a sudden have that empty time, right? You fill up your house with more maidservants. Oh, you'll be able to do more things. You'll start having more guests over. So then the work multiplies. Shalosh en amatzat mita hashara avde, but it would seem she does have to do the rest, right? Which we talked about. The rest wasn't clear because the next one is Yoshevet b'katedra. What's the difference between stage 3 and stage 4, right? 3 shvachot, 4 shvachot. Rashi had said it's that she doesn't have to schlep things for be the messenger boy or messenger girl, right? He sends her off to, go get me this from upstairs, go get me that from upstairs. That she might still have to do, and we'll see a few more things she still has to do, even if she's Yoshevet b'katedra. So it seems like she still has to do other things. I already brought you a third one for the guests. So we got one dealing with you and her, one dealing with me and her, and one dealing with the guests. So what do you need, right? I don't need to do anything. The more people we have in the house, the more guests we're going to have in the house. The number of guests is going to multiply. So now they say, well, now comes the big question. If so, Arbanami, if you're going to say every time you have more maidservants, you're going to have more guests, then it's going to go on forever, right? You're never going to sit still because there's always going to be more work. To which they say, this is a good line also. Once you have 4 people, they work, right? When you have a team, whenever you try to do a lot of things, right? You get a lot of people to do a big job, it goes much quicker because everybody's helping and everybody spurs the other one. Once you have 4 people working in the house, you could basically do anything. Yeah, that's enough. So for those who have 4 people working in their house, you're in good shape. Okay, now we said, Amar Rav Chana v'item Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, lo achnisa lo mamash, ela kevan sheruya lachnis af al pi shelo achnisa. The Mishnah had said if she brings with her into the marriage, what if she didn't bring? But what if she has the means to bring? So he says, as long as she has the means to bring, like her dowry gave her enough money, even if she doesn't have, she already can claim, I don't need to do this. The fact that you haven't hired someone, that's your problem. Okay, but I don't have to do these things. And here's a braita that supports this and yet adds more. Or kind of says it a little differently. Whether she brought someone in, or if she didn't necessarily bring into the marriage, it's a little bit different than what we said a minute ago, but she can deduct from her dowry or whatever money she has. If she can deduct from there, then she can claim that she doesn't have to do these jobs. So now we have the 4 maidservants. She now can sit in this big, comfortable chair, right, and basically do nothing. Amar Yitzchak bar Chananya, Amar Rav Huna, Af al pi shamru yoshevet b'katedra, aval. And this is what we're going to see. She still has certain jobs to do. Remember who this is. This is Rabbi Yitzchak bar Chananya. In the name of Rav Huna, we're going to have a bunch of statements of his. There's 3 things she needs to do. Number 1, she needs to pour the cup. That doesn't mean pour the cup of wine. It means the wine was concentrate. She has to make the wine, okay? Pour the wine into the water into the wine, mix it. That was apparently considered an intimate. We're going to see that in a minute. That was considered something intimate in those days. Again, you have to kind of get your head, which is fun, in terms of getting us into the life of women and men in those days. So this was something intimate between him and her, she would do. Okay, so basically diluting the wine. Matzalo tamita, setting up the bed, okay, which their bed was made with, things. It wasn't like put a sheet on a bed, but there was straw. You had to set up the straw in the proper way, get the bed ready, and wait for those who are writing things in the chat. Just wait, we're getting there. And she washes his hands, feet, and face. Okay, so those she still has to do, because if she's not going to do those, I think their point is you're almost like you're not married. Those are intimate things between husband and wife, and also you certainly don't want a maidservant doing that for your husband. So why your husband isn't doing it himself, it's a good question. But basically, since those are intimate things, they should be done by the woman. Another thing he says, and this is obviously connected, all the jobs she's supposed to do in the house, nidda. when she's in nidda, even though theoretically she has this tuma, right? And you might think they should be separate, she still does all the jobs in the house. Okay, sorry, women, you don't get out of the jobs when you're in nidda. You might have thought that would be a good thing. I don't have to cook the food. I don't have to this, right? She still does that. Okay, by the way, this changed a little bit in the Middle Ages because of certain perceptions of women in nidda and from Christian influence of that stay away from her, and they limited things that she could do in the house. They didn't want her touching the food. They didn't want this, that, the other thing. But you see from here, it's clear she can do all the work in the house except for these three things, because these three things are intimate. So it all works together. Okay, those were viewed as intimate things, right? Again, it's much more easy to see the intimacy by washing his body, at least parts of his body. Setting up the bed a little less so, although again, laws of nidda, right? There's all these issues, anything surrounding the bedroom and the bed, it's a place of intimacy. The issue of the cup, I think is just very, the wine is very hard for us to understand because we don't dilute the wine and why this was considered. But again, it's things that meals that often could be intimate. You can think of a romantic meal, okay? Rava limits this one as well. So it's only when he's there. If he's not in the room when she's doing it, then there's nothing wrong with her doing that. Mizigata kos. Okay, now with the setting up the wine, since it's it sounds to me like since this isn't as intimate a gesture as, let's say, washing his hands, face, and feet, so the rabbis came up with ways in which the wives could do it with what we call like a shinoi, with a change, just like we saw in Halacha Shabbat. We just talked about this. But if you do it differently, then it already, in this case, it's a little different than Shabbat. The idea is that you do it differently. It's a sign. It's noticeable. Your husband realizes, right? And it shows, oh, wait, we're in a different time of the month now. It's a reminder. Okay, so he would have his wife do it with her left hand instead of her right hand, and that already was okay. The next two or the next three are they would have the wife after she could dilute the wine normally, but put it in a place that was atypical, where she wouldn't normally, instead of putting it down on the table, so she would put it on the opening of the jug. Rav Beisadya, he would have his wife put it on a pillow. Rav Papa Ashrafrifa on a shrafraf, on a stool. Okay, they did some little change. Now, we're going to get off on a total tangent. We're going to get to this tangent because we were talking about Rav Yitzchak bar Chananya in the name of Rav Huna. So we're going to have another statement of his. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chananya, Amar Rav Huna. And from here, we're going to get off on a total tangent about food cravings. Now, you might say, okay, you might remember, we talked about food cravings in the 8th chapter of Yoma. Okay, apropos, we're getting to Yamim Noraim. It's a good chapter to review if you want before Yom Kippur. It's all about the fast and about tshuva and repentance. And it starts off with this case of a woman who's pregnant, who has this craving for some food on Yom Kippur, or if it's non-kosher food, there's all sorts of things, what we do to help her. And they viewed cravings as very serious, not just, oh, I really want a cookie right now, or I really want ice cream or something like that, but it's dangerous, okay? Actually dangerous. If you don't eat particular foods, you might get sick from it. You might get into a dangerous situation. So because of that, we get into now what we call hilchot seudah, laws of mealtime. So with the meals, okay, I'm talking about meals in their day, they had a shamash, a guy who was basically the waiter. So the question is, how do you treat the waiter when it comes to when does he eat? So the halacha he brings down is, hakol mashim b'fnei hashamash, you can leave any food for him to eat at the end of the meal and let him wait till the end of the meal, chutz mibasar v'yayin, other than wine and meat, which we saw at the very end of yesterday's daf, right? We started today, the wine and the meat and how it's good for children, right? Here we see wine and meat is something right? It comes out, the sizzling steak, you want it right then. Okay, you're not, it's unfair to make it wait till the end of the meal, and the wine as well. Rav Chisda, well, basar shamein v'yayin yashan. It has to be fatty meat and old wine, not new wine and not lean meat. Rava, basar shamein kol hashana kula. The fatty meat is any time of the year, but yayin yashan is only b'tkupat tammuz. Only in the summer months is when it really has that pungent smell. It's the smell that gets you going, right? Just like in Ulashi Yiricha, as a pregnant woman who smells something, right? It's the smell. We also had the smell earlier today with the woman with the etrog and a lot of the stuff we had the smell with the child recognizing the mother through the smell. seem to have a lot of themes, even though this is a totally different topic, seem to be connected. So now they say, now we're going to have a bunch of statements of people about their food cravings. I was in front of Shmuel. They brought him a cooked dish with mushrooms. If they hadn't given to me, I would have been, in danger of my life. Rav Ashi says, I was before Rav Kahana. They brought him slices of turnip in vinegar. Doesn't sound like the most appealing thing, but if he hadn't given me some of it, I would have been in a dangerous predicament. Rav Papa Amar Afilu Tamarta Dahanunita, even these big fat dates make me feel like that. Klala Demilta, the rule is called ile recha ile kiyua, anything with a smell and anything that has sharp taste to it. Avua Bar'i and Yama Bar'i, two brothers. Chad Safe Mikol Mino Mina. One would give, we're back to the shamash now. One would give the waiter from a little bit of every type of food in the beginning of the meal, and then he would fully eat at the end. The Chad Safe Michamina, and the other one would only give him one type of food to eat before the meal, and the rest he pushed off to the end of the meal. Now, again, this is the Gemara's way of saying which one was the right thing to do and which was the wrong thing to do. Mar Mishtai Eliyahu Bahadeh, Eliyahu and Rabbi would appear and speak to one of them. Vit Mar Mishtai Lo Mishtai Eliyahu Bahadeh, but to the other one who didn't give him food till the end of the meal and only one type, Eliyahu would only speak to him, would never speak to him. Okay, would never appear before him. Obviously, this isn't a punishment, right? It's just saying you didn't do, the first one did more than what was necessary, but it was obviously very good that he did that. Another story, the same basic idea. Hanu chartim chaside, two chasidim, and Amrila Rav Mary for Pinchas b'nei Rav Chisda. Some people say it was these other two brothers, the sons of Rav Chisda. Mar kadim safe, mar ma'acher safe. One would give him food before the meal, one would give him food till the end of the meal. Dekadim safe, the one who gave him the food before, Eliyahu mishtaya ba'adeh, Eliyahu would come appear to him, to ma'acher safe, lo mishtaya Eliyahu ba'adeh, the one who didn't, right, would give him the food at the end of the meal, Eliyahu would not appear to him. This is a very interesting story. They were standing at the petach of another Persian king, Igzor Malka. He's less known in the Gemara. Shavur Malka appears a lot. This guy doesn't appear very often, but he appears in our story. So pass in front of them, right? So they're near where the king is, and right by the king's mansion, and the butler passes by with food. Chazi Rav Ashi Marzutra. He sees Marzutra turning out on the bet. Dechavir Ape. He sees Marzutra go pale. Oh my God, this guy's going to faint. He's going to die. He needs this, right? He's craving this food. So what does he do? Imagine, okay, you're right outside the king's palace. The guy's passing by with a tray of food, and goes Rav Ashi. Shakil, I want you to remember these words. Shakil be'etzba'ateh, sticks his finger right into the food. Anachle b'pumeh, he puts his finger on the mouth of Marzutra. Now, it wasn't kosher food. It was the Shavur Malka's food. In a minute, you're going to see possibly it was even pig, according to some interpretation. And he puts it right by this reminds us, if you remember from Yoma, it's also, what do you do if it's not kosher? So he puts it by his mouth. Comes the butler of the king, and he says to him, Amarle, you just ruined the king's meal, right? What do you do when you ruin the king's meal? I think I'll chop off your head. There's some commentaries ask, like, yes, he was trying to save Marzutra, but he was risking his life. Like, how could you risk your life to save Marzutra? Right? You might say, Ein safek motzimi de vadai, like Marzutra was about to die right then and there, or at least faint, right? Which maybe he saw was like a death. And, he said, well, maybe they'll catch me, maybe they won't notice, maybe I don't know what. Right. Also, if you think about corona, right, sticking his germs in, anyway, the whole thing. So Amrule. So we're going to have a bunch of people who respond to him. The first is, you ruined the king's meal. Amrule, he said to them, the king's, right. So first, the butler says, you just ruined the king's meal. So now Amrule, who's Amrule? Rashi says the king's shotrim, right, his policemen, his whatever they are, his, Secret Service guys. I don't know what you call them, but they say to him, Amai ta'avid hachi. Why did you do this? Amar lehu, man ta'avid hachi pasil l'ma'achal demalka. He says, I wanted to ruin the king's food, because I knew that if I stuck my finger in the food, you wouldn't bring the food to the king. Amrule amai. So they said, why were you trying to ruin the food for the king? Amar lehu, davar acher chazebe. I saw something else in there. Now, something else we've seen a bunch of times. Rashi claims often something else is pig, pork, but it also could be leprosy. And we're going to see leprosy later in the story. Rashi combines the two and says it was pork that had leprosy in it, or leprosy, or a leper touched it, or something with leprosy. And they didn't want the king to eat it and die. So I was trying to save the king's life. Now, obviously, they didn't notice that he put it by the mouth of Mar Zutra. Otherwise, his whole story wouldn't have, right? He wouldn't have been able to go with this story. So what do? They don't believe him, obviously. So they check the meat to see, is there really leprosy in it? But below eshkachu, they check, they don't see anything. Now he's really in trouble. So now, notice, shakil etzba'ate anach alei. Remember before, he took his finger and he put it on the mouth of Mar Zutra. This time he takes his finger and he puts it on the meat. Amar lehu, hachami badkitu, and he points right to a particular spot. And he said, did you check right here? Badku eshkachu. They checked and they actually, in fact, found, okay, miracle happened, and the meat had leprosy in it. Amrule Rabbanan. So now, okay, we have first the reaction of the butler, then we have the reaction of the king's people, his servants, whatever they are. Now we have the reaction of the rabbis who said to him, my time, why did you rely on a miracle? Like, how do you know that you're not supposed to rely on miracles? Amar lahu, I saw, it wasn't like I just was hoping a miracle would happen, but I actually saw whatever this means. We don't know what this means, but a ruach, like a spirit of leprosy that was hanging over him. Now, over it, it's not really clear. Over Mar Zutra, maybe, over the meat, we don't really know, but somehow we don't know exactly what that was, but it gave him the confidence to know that something, he would have a way out, basically. Okay, very strange story. What we do with this, I don't really know, but it's an interesting story in any case. And again, we're very off on a tangent here, just showing how severe people's cravings for food are. Hahu Roma'ah, there was a Roman, to Amar la lahi itata, he went over to a woman and said, minsabali, marry me. Amar le lo, she said, no, not interested in marrying you. Azalai terimane, he took a pomegranate, palev achel kameh, he started peeling it, cracking it open, and basically eating it in front of her. Kol maya ditzara le balate, velo havla adizagla. Okay, her mouth started watering, and all her saliva, because she really wanted the pomegranate, all the saliva she swallowed. Okay, so she's basically, her mouth is watering, and she's swallowing all of it. And he wouldn't give her until she basically erupted. Okay, so Rashi says zagla. Zag is from the language of glass. We use the word zag by glass. So the zagag is the guy who makes the glass. Basically, her body blew up until Rashi says her face and her stomach blew up to that they got so thinned out that it was like translucent. Okay, so it was like glass basically, and you could see through her. Okay, it's obviously a bit of an exaggeration, but right, stories like to exaggerate. So l'sof amarla, imasina le minasbetle, if I heal you, will you marry me? Amarle in, she said yes, because right, better than dying right here. Azalai terimane, palev achal kamasi, did the exact same thing, ate the pomegranates in front of her. Amarla, kol maya ditsarilach, tuf shadai. All the saliva that you have right now, spit it out. Instead of swallowing it, spit it out. Ad dinafka minaki hutzayarka, until something came out of her that was green like a leaf. She kept spitting out the saliva. This green thing comes out of her mouth. Again, very strange. Ve'itasiat, and she became healed from this. Okay, again, these are interesting stories. I don't have a good explanation really of how to deal with them, what to make of them. But anyway, these are our stories. We're going to move on. You can think about them. Ve'osa betsemer. Okay, now we get to one of the last things she does, right? Even if she has a bunch of servants, she still spins the wool. Betsemer bepishilo. Remember, their clothes were either made of flax or linen, flax or wool. So, right, flax, linen. So notice here it says wool. She doesn't have to spin the flax. Matnitimane. So who does our Mishnah go by? Rabbi Yehuda Tanya. Now we're going to learn again other things that he can't demand from her, right? Our Mishnah was what he can demand from her. Here's the Mishnah that we would have wished for, which was, right, what he can't demand from the woman. He can't force her not to stand before her father, meaning like do things for his father. Can't, right? She kind of has to do things for her husband. She has responsibility, but not for his father. And not for his son. Right? Son's from a different marriage. She doesn't have to put straw before his horses and donkeys, those kind of animals. She does have to bring before the cattle. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it causes you to get to smell, have bad breath. And it also, what happens is when you spin, you also put it in your mouth, and it causes your lips to stiffen or some sort of reaction to happen to your lips. And thank you, Julie, our weaver, for pointing out that it's much harder to spin flax than it is to spin wool. And what we're talking about here is the Roman flax. Okay, that's specifically the type that we're referring to here. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, even if he brings mash vachot, what did he say? If you remember, it's not good to stand by idly. She still has to do some of the jobs because it's bad. It brings women to licentious behavior. Amar Melchio, Amar Rabbi halacha Rabbi Eliezer. You might remember Melchio, and we're going to have a repeat of a sugya we've seen before. So Rabbi Melchio paskins like Rabbi Eliezer that she shouldn't be doing nothing. It's not good for her. Amar Rabbi Chanina Bered Rabbi Ika. Shipud shvachot v'gumot Rav Melchio, Lorit Ephraim Miklet Ugvina Rav Malkia. Okay, there's 6 Mahloket, 3 Rav Melchio said, 3 Rav Malkia said. We don't remember who said what. So he's going to tell us these are the 3 that he said, and those are the 3 that he said. Shipud is if you have a skewer and you leave some, there's a little bit of meat on it, but not enough to really like a kazayit or an olive bulb to eat. Then you can still move it on Yantif, even though theoretically it's muktzah because it's not really used for anything, but you can move it to the side on Yantif. Shvachot is our case, that you still have to work. And gumot is a woman who has 2 hair follicles, but not 2 hairs in the follicles. She's still considered of age for the chigadu chalitza. So those 3 were said by Rav Melchio, according to Rabbi Chanina. Blorit ever maklen gvina were said by Rav Malkia. Blorit did these Roman haircuts that they would do, or the pagans would have these haircuts where they would leave some of their hair long in the name of Avodah Zarah. If you're the hair cutter, you can't cut within 3 fingers breadths of that area because we don't want it to be that you basically help them grow this hair for the Avodah Zarah. It's like you're worshiping Avodah Zarah. Ephraim Miklet was a type of ashes they would put on wounds, and it would dye your skin, so it would look like a tattoo. So they forbade that. And gvina is the cheese of Gentiles because they believed that they coated them with lard. So that was all said by Rav Melchia. Rav Papa had a different approach. Amar matnita nu matnita Rav Malkia. The ones that come from Mishnahs and Braitos are the one that Rav Malkia said, and Shmatata, the ones that Amoraim said, was Rav Melchia. So simanech, what's the siman for that? Matnita malkata, because both end with the a. Matnita was said by the malka, which is Rav Melchia, and not Rav Melchio. And my ben, that's how you remember. And my benayu, what's the difference? Shvachot is in the Mishnah, and the first person attributed to Rav Melchio, but it's from the Mishnah, so the second person attributed to Rav Malkia. Okay, Rashbag Omer, Hainu Tanakam. So Rashbag said also that staying idly causes boredom. So what's the difference between boredom and licentious behavior? In other words, we know there's difference, but what's the difference in halacha between the 2? Right? Hainu Tanakama, they both seem to be saying, don't sit around idly, you should do some work. If she plays with little dogs, which keeps her occupied, okay, it's not a job, but it keeps her occupied, and nardishir, some people say that's chess. She plays games that develop her intellect, which is interesting to think about, they're developing her intellect, so they think that, right? So if it's boredom, then these things keep you away from boredom. They don't necessarily keep you away from licentious behavior because you're just playing, you're not working. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we get to another very interesting Mishnah, which is, okay, a man, we've already learned, yes, it is interesting. They talk about dogs here. I don't know why dogs. People didn't like dogs, but anyway, maybe that's not the only interpretation, by the way, of Guriata. Rashi says dogs. Anyway, maybe little dogs are different than big dogs. And maybe the dogs they didn't like were the killer dogs, kind of, big killer dog type thing. Okay, next. A man has rights to give his wife ona. We've learned this before. He has to, the whole question is how often does he have to commit to, to give his wife sexual relations when she wants? And can he, if he swears, makes a nidda or a vow, not a swear, a vow, that I will not have sexual relations with you. If he limits it to less than 2 weeks, that's okay. That's okay. You can say, I'm not doing it for 2 weeks. Beit Hillel omrim Shabbat echad. He says only 1 week. However, not in a vow form, but if he goes to learn Torah, because in those days, the yeshiva, it's not like every village had a yeshiva. So if he goes to learn Torah, he can go away even for 30 days. This is going to lead us to those famous stories of the rabbis who went away to learn Torah. We're going to see what they have to say about that. That's tomorrow's daf. Hapoalim Shabbat echad. If you're a worker, you get 1 week, because that's the workers often went away during the week. Ha'ona amura b'Torah. Okay, this is the mitzvah ona. Ona means at set intervals. What are these set intervals? Hatayalim b'chol yom. If she's interested, not, they don't have to. But if you don't work really, then every day. Poalim, if you're a worker, shtayim b'Shabbat, twice a week. Hachamarim, the donkey riders, because they would go farther away, they would take the donkeys places, echad b'Shabbat. They usually were home once a week, so once a week. Hagamalim, who go on much farther trips with camels, echad l'shloshim, and one it's every 30 days. Hasapanim, the sailors, echad l'shisha chodeshim, because they would travel far once every 6 months. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So now the Gemara starts off and wants to know, my time to Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai, you said you have 2 weeks, and Beit Hillel said 1 week. Where do they get it from? Gamri miyoledet nikeva. He says, look, in the Torah, they have to separate for 2 weeks if she gives birth to a girl. So it must be that's okay. Even though obviously what woman in her right mind would want to have relations, then let's put that aside right after childbirth. But okay. Beit Hillel, Gamri miyoledet zachar. Beit Hillel learns it from the male child, who it's 7 days. To which the Gemara asks, if there's a 7-day option, a 14-day option, it seems like 14 days would be okay. So Beit Hillel, if he's learning from Yoledet, why wouldn't he learn from the girl? So then they say, we're going to change our tune. If he really learned it from Yoledet, yes, we'd say yes. But really, Beit Hillel, nidda. He learned it actually from the nidda, from a woman in nidda, which is 7 days, and not from Yoledet. What's the root of the Mahloket? You're going to be surprised by this one. Common thing is learned from a common thing. What's a common thing? That a man gets angry at his wife and he says, I'm taking a vow that I'm not going to have relations with you. They view that as common. Find that a little bit strange, but okay. Maybe, different times, or maybe, I don't know. So, and they're going to learn that from something that's more common, which is nidda. That's Beit Hillel. Mar savar mididuhu garim la mididuhu garim la. He caused her to be a yoledet, because she wouldn't be yoledet if it weren't for him, right? It takes 2 to tango. And he also caused her to get into this situation because he was madir, as opposed to nidda, which obviously has nothing to do with his initiating. Okay, we're going to stop here for today. It was a long daf. There was a lot in here. We'll start from Amarav at the beginning of tomorrow's daf. Have a great day, everybody. This gave you chomer lemachshava, as they say, food for thought. Interesting Gemara. Like I said, most of this I wouldn't view as halachic, right? This is also, again, breach of contract. If she says, you're not giving it to me enough, the question is this not enough? It depends on who you are and what the expectations are. Okay, that's it for today.